So at the time of me writing this video, we are in the fall 2023 anime season, and Spy X Family's second season has started airing. And as a fan of the series, I'm sad to say I'm a little disappointed. Why is that? Because the dog doesn't sound like a fucking dog. They could have gotten a real dog, but nah. It's literally just a guy going Okay, no, that's not it. Spy X Family is a pretty interesting premise. Our setting is a fictional country with major political tensions. Our main characters are a spy and an assassin who don't know each other's identities, in a fake marriage with an adopted telepathic daughter. There's honestly so much shit going on. And so we're waiting for a lot of stuff to happen with the plot. We're waiting for this Cold War to continue. We're waiting for Lloyd and Yor's identities to be revealed. We're waiting to see if Anya can get more SpongeBob driving school gold stars. Stellas. And probably most of all, we're waiting for this family dynamic to be put to the test. But we've gotten a 2-cour show and now a second season, and pretty much none of that shit even came close to happening. Don't get me wrong, I still like the show. I think it's hilarious, it's adorable, and overall really enjoyable, but just like its characters, its story is presented as something with multiple sides to it. There's the slice of life comedy side, which it nails down super well, but there's also the more forgotten side, the conflict. Because for every episode where Anya and Damien are fucking around and playing card games, or when Lloyd and Yor are going on a date, or when they play fucking tennis, it does make you think, so what the fuck is going on with the plot? Is it gonna go anywhere? Are we just gonna stay in limbo forever? And ultimately, I think this issue stems from the fact that Spy X Family is an episodic anime. Okay, real quick, in case you're like, what the fuck is an episodic anime? Let's go through that first. So broadly speaking, there are 2 types of shows out there. We have serial shows and episodic shows. The difference is pretty simple. Serial shows tend to follow one larger story across multiple episodes, while episodic shows tend to tell self-contained stories within singular episodes. So they introduce the premise, go through the meat of the plot, and then resolve and conclude all within the 22-ish minute runtime of a typical anime episode. And of course, there's a lot more nuance to this too. It's not just strictly serial and strictly episodic. We also have a lot of different types of episodic anime, but I'm not gonna go into that in too much detail in this video. Okay, I lied. The levels of episodicness. Note that this is not a real thing, I just made it the fuck up, but hey, it's fun to categorize shit, so let's go. To start, we've got level 1 of episodicness, which is basically just serial anime with episodic parts. These are really common in the shonen and mecha genres, so shows like Evangelion, Inuyasha, and Bleach, where it's really common to have monster of the week type arcs, where a random enemy is introduced in each episode to be defeated by the end. And you also see them a lot near the beginning of long shonen types of shows, where the purpose of episodic arcs is to gradually introduce characters and plot points that'll be important later on when the story picks up. Okay, moving on to level 2. These are primarily episodic anime with serial traits. So these are anime where we have an overarching plot progression, but most of the episodes aren't too concerned with it and kind of stick to their own thing. So that's shows like Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, Samurai Champloo, and like I was talking about before, Spy X Family. Level 3 episodic shows pump up the episodicness even more because now we don't even really have an overarching plot. At this point, we maybe have a really loose premise, but it's mostly just a lot of completely disconnected episodes that each tell their own complete story without any real progression. At the very most, you might see some occasional reference between episodes that crazy fans could latch onto like parasitic freaks to make a timeline chart, but not much beyond that. Some good examples are shows like Mushi-shi and Kino's Journey. And then finally, we have level 4. These are super insanely episodic, to the point where the universe literally resets itself between episodes. I can only really think of 2 prominent examples, which are Space Dandy and then basically like every Saturday morning cartoon. You get the same cast of characters, but they could all just fucking explode and die at the end of an episode and then respawn in the next one with no memory of what happened. Kind of freaky. Okay, that's it. Back to the other guy. Okay, so the problem that I'm talking about in this video obviously didn't start with Spy X Family. A shining example of where I first started to notice this is with what I like to call the big 3 of episodic anime. Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, and Samurai Champloo. Of course, there are others, but these 3 seem to stand out a bit more as episodic anime that are still talked about all the time, even like 300 years after their initial airing. So it feels weird, even wrong, to say that I've seen them all, and though I don't hate any of them, I definitely didn't quite get the hype surrounding them. Like, let's look at Samurai Champloo as an example. This is a show about this girl traveling with these 2 samurai dudes on a journey to find someone she calls the Sunflower Samurai, who is a mysterious character that we get literally no other information about other than
a samurai who
he smells like sunflowers. And throughout this 26 episode long series, the Sunflower Samurai is really only relevant for like 4 episodes. The rest of the time we're getting episodes about other shit. Like, oh, here's this random artist guy who's in trouble with the Yakuza, let's help him. And oh no, Mugen can't read, let's teach him how to read. And I'm not even joking, there's an episode where they all just get high on mushrooms and battle a zombie apocalypse, which is fine. A lot of these stories can actually get really interesting, creative, even emotional. But like, I couldn't help but feel like I was just watching filler episodes most of the time. And at this point, you might say something like, oh, it's about the journey, not the destination, or what about the character moments? Oh. Shut the fuck up, let me finish. I call this problem expectations versus delivery. Basically, the more stuff you set up in the premise of a show, the more expectations are set up. And the more expectations that are set up, the more you need to regularly deliver on those expectations to have people not lose interest. For me personally, none of the big three were really able to do that. Just like Spy X Family, they each started off presenting themselves as serial shows with interesting premises, featuring cool main characters with mysterious pasts and all that shit. So when they swapped from the serial format to mostly being episodic, without any real plot progression, I ended up feeling like something was missing most of the time, which is a nicer way of saying that I got bored as shit. I think it's totally fine to have plots like this, but only as long as you don't make these big promises at the beginning that set up expectations from your audience that take so long to be fulfilled that they lose interest and watch fucking Big Mouth instead. Do you want to live in that world? I don't want to live in that world. I've been thinking about this episodic anime problem for a while now, to the point where I was pretty convinced that this was a fundamental problem with episodic anime as a whole, that the format wasn't well suited for good storytelling. But, as much as I love being a hater, this is not a video where I pretend to be smarter than you, like, oh, here's why Cowboy Bebop sucks and you're all wrong. Nah. Instead, I got more interested in this whole world of episodic anime. I started to look into other shows and realized, holy shit, there's a lot of episodic anime out there. Like, a lot. Like, K-On! Episodic. Nichijou? Episodic. Episodic, 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 episodic! And all of these shows are shows that I fucking love. Except Pokemon. So what's the deal? Am I a fraud? Is my brain fucking broken? The real reason is that all of these shows adhere to the same principle of promise and delivery, except with the difference of they don't promise shit, and like not even in a bad way. Simple premises, plots that you could describe in one sentence. If you promise jack shit, it's easy to over-deliver based on your promise of jack shit. So you're gonna keep people engaged more easily. So we're gonna take a look at some examples of the episodic format in anime done right, in my opinion, which is better than yours. Also, I'm addicted to putting things in categories, so we're gonna do that here too, starting with a really big category, which is episodic anime from the comedy and slice of life genres. Turns out a lot of slice of life and comedy shows just end up being pretty episodic by default. Kaguya-sama, Violet Evergarden, Nichijou, Grand Blue, Uramichi Oniisan, Cells at Work, Urusei Yatsura, and of course Spy X Family, which I already talked about. All of these are episodic to various degrees. And of course the thing that I mentioned about simple premises, that's easy as shit for comedies to do. Shows like Nichijou, Asobi Asobase, and Urusei Yatsura don't really need much other than just funny characters and funny situations. Not all of them are like this though. There's also shows like Violet Evergarden, which is a really serious and emotional anime that tackles a lot of really heavy themes. But its premise is presented in a way that also works for the episodic format. The war is already over. Violet's already in a new place with a new job lined up, and it's clear to the audience watching that each episode is going to be a new case of Violet learning about emotions after handling jobs with different clients and learning about their stories. The only thing that people are left wondering about from episode to episode is where the fuck this guy is, but that often takes enough of a backseat that it doesn't really distract from the stories each of the episodes tell. K-On! Is another favorite of mine that sets up absolutely no fucking expectations in terms of where the plot is going. It is crystal clear from the beginning that they are just chillin', hanging out, and not much plot progress is gonna be made. So the show just ends up being a really fun watch that doesn't require a lot of thought, which is what I thought the show was before they fucking destroyed my emotions. One of the strengths of episodic anime that's demonstrated really well by K-On! Is that when you set up no expectations from the audience, that's when you get to fuck with them. That's when you get to slowly but surely get them really attached to your characters, and that's when you get to hit them with more serious scenes out of nowhere that hit extra hard, specifically because you're not expecting it. Yes, I am talking about the strawberry thing.
Moogie, watch the fuck! Ice cold!
One more show I wanted to talk about in this category is Horimiya, which you could say is not an episodic anime. And you're right, except I'm talking about season 2. The first season of Horimiya was basically a complete adaptation of the story from the first to the last chapter, except they skipped a lot of stuff to get there. This kind of pissed people off a bit, so they made a second season called The Missing Pisses, which adapts a selection of some of the most popular chapters that were left out of the first season. Now these are what you would call more episodic because they are all self-contained stories that don't really lead into each other, but are still relevant and very good for character building. And I've seen this opinion floating around that a lot of people actually prefer this one over the first season, despite being pretty much all kind of extra content outside of the main plot. Of course, it helps that they were able to just cherry pick only the best and most popular side stories for this, but it's still true that this show can stand on the strengths of its highly episodic portions because the character writing is so strong, and just because it's so fucking cute. I feel like this format is pretty interesting, and I'd like to see more shows experiment with this in the future. Okay, next. Saturday morning cartoons. This is a weird category, but I promise it makes sense. Kinda. These are shows like Panty Stocking, Space Dandy, Pokemon, and just because I want to mention it, HAMTARO. And I call it the Saturday morning cartoons category because of these anime's similarity with, you know, SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, Phineas and Ferb, Family Guy and The Simpsons, and like 5,000 other examples of shows that are pretty much the most episodic shit imaginable. But the key difference between most of these and a lot of other episodic anime is that there is pretty much zero overarching plot. To an extreme degree. You can't have any expectations because there is nothing to expect from episode to episode. Dandy from Space Dandy is not going on a journey to do anything in particular, he's just doing whatever shit the one episode's about, and only for this one episode. Speaking of Dandy, I'm actually going to talk about Space Dandy some more. So as a super quick summary, Space Dandy is about a dandy guy in space. It's pretty much just Dandy with his robot friend and his cat alien friend going around from planet to planet trying to capture rare aliens because they're bounty hunters. That's pretty much it. There's no connecting plot aside from the Team Rocket wannabes chasing after Dandy but never actually getting to him. And like I mentioned earlier, as the quintessential level 4 episodic anime example, Space Dandy's universe quite literally resets itself between episodes. So you'll get episodes where the characters literally fucking die at the end and then are just magically okay in the next one. Space Dandy is the first show I decided to watch after finishing Samurai Champloo and feeling kind of jaded about episodic anime, and it was a great pick because to my surprise I really liked it. In my own words, I like Dandy more than the other one so far, even though it's arguably even more episodic, and I think it's because other than the whole universe reset theory thing, I don't really have any questions that I want answered, so it's more like a slice of life show in that way. Other than a few very vague things, the show never really teased much from its plot. I didn't really find myself curious about Dandy's past because they don't even really reference it much. So as a result, I'm not disappointed that they never really talk about it because it's not meant to be an important thing. Unlike Spike, Vash, and Mugen, Dandy is honestly just some dude fucking around. And in the rare moments where we do get some lore or some insight into the deeper aspects of the show, it feels more like a nice bonus than a required thing. And this gives us so much more room to just sit back and enjoy the ride with the fun cast of characters and jokes. Next on my journey is, well, Kino's journey, and just journey shows in general. There's two kinds of shows that you might think about when you think of the word journey, which is adventure shows and journey shows. Which, once again, that's not a real thing, I just made it the fuck up. Adventure is the pretty broad category that the big three all fall into. There's usually some end goal that the characters want to reach eventually, so progression is the name of the game here. Journey shows are different. These are shows that fall into a broad category of anime I like to call, look at this beautiful mystical magical world, isn't it so mysterious and fascinating but also dangerous, wow. You know, shows like these, where the main sources of appeal are the world building and, well, this. Let's dive deeper into Kino's journey and by extension its spiritual successor, Wandering Witch: The Journey of Elaina, but I'm going to be focusing on Kino's. Just know that they're pretty similar in a lot of ways, so a lot of what I'm about to say applies to both shows. Kino's journey once again has a pretty simple premise, so it's just our main character Kino and her talking motorcycle friend traveling around the world. And in every episode they'll arrive at a new country and just stay there for a bit while meeting new people and learning about the general situation of that country. Maybe they have a unique culture or some kind of political struggle or whatever. But by the end of the episode, Kino always makes a point to pack up and leave because she's a traveler, not some hero who's meant to save all these people or anything like that. Her goal is just to see as much of the world as she can. The journey shows are pretty interesting a lot of the time because they like to use their episodic format as a way to give social and political commentary, which, even though the show's from 2003, a lot of that social commentary is, still relevant today.
本の登場人物に本気で恋をし、身を滅ぼす者まで現れた。
それはまともじゃないね。
They really just give you a sneak peek into some brand new world and ways of organizing human civilizations and what the consequences of each of those are. Like in the first episode, they get to this country where someone invented telepathic communication, so basically everyone could read each other's minds. But it led to everyone in the country having really strained relationships and everyone being anxious and paranoid around others to the point where every single person now lives alone with no human connections. So in a way, I guess it's kind of like Don't say Black Mirror, 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 don't say Black Mirror. Everyone says Black Mirror, don't say it, don't do it, don't say it. The other big mention when it comes to these journey type shows is Black Mirror. I mean, Mushi-shi. This is another episodic anime that doesn't bother introducing a setup or a big premise at all, they just jump into the episodic format right away. Mushi-shi is a collection of stories that all center around the main character, Ginko, who travels around from place to place and helps solve people's problems caused by Mushi, which are basically these magical, ghostly spirits that cause all sorts of supernatural effects. Each episode deals with a new case of Ginko finding out about people's Mushi-related problems and identifying which kind of Mushi it is and what the solution is, if there even is a solution. And to be perfectly honest, going into the show, I thought it was going to be boring as fuck. Mushi-shi is known for its slow, relaxed pacing and atmosphere, and I thought this combined with its episodic format would make me want to... But something about it really roped me in. And I think it's two main things. One is just how creative and interesting the stories and supernatural concepts featured in the show can get. Each episode introduces some new premise of a Mushi-related phenomenon and goes into how it affects humanity and what kinds of social and societal problems might stem from it. Some of these Mushi can even get really weird and convoluted to the point where I'm like, is this a Mushi or a fucking JoJo stand? Like, oh yeah, there's this village where you can go to this one spot in the sea, and if you die there, a thing will consume you and turn you into these little balls that are just the embryo version of yourself, so that people end up going there to die so that they can be reborn, and then you just end up with a village where people give birth to their own parents in a cycle over and over again. Yeah. It can get very what the fuck, but I also just can't look away. The more out there the idea is, the more engaged I am. And I think that these 20-something minute chunks to tell each story is the perfect amount of time for this. If any of these stories lasted for more than like 2 episodes, I could definitely see them getting really boring and dragging on for too long. I'm not that interested in much more beyond just the core story, and the episodic format gives us just enough to be satisfied with before moving on, just like the traveler Ginko himself. Just experience something new, think about it, and then move on to the next one. The second reason that I got roped into Mushi-shi so hard is because of its grounded characters and powerful storytelling. And a big part of that comes from the focus on tragedy. Because yeah, a lot of these Mushi's effects do lead to really tragic outcomes, and we often don't see happy endings. As knowledgeable and resourceful Ginko is, he's not really this superhuman problem solver who can fix anything. What he does instead when problems have no real solutions is teach people what he knows about the Mushi and help them learn to live with it. Sometimes this shit can get really dark, and I don't want to spoil any of the more powerful stories, so I'll give an example of what I think is more of a mild one. There's an episode where a woman is afflicted with a Mushi who causes it to endlessly rain wherever she goes, which was initially nice for getting rid of droughts, but eventually caused terrible floods that killed lots of people. So she's forced to live a lifestyle where she's constantly traveling from place to place to avoid flooding. When Ginko shows up in her life, he reveals that the only way to fix this problem is just by waiting out the Mushi's lifespan. Not exactly great news to hear. But even though it would likely take years before her problem was solved, the end of the episode showed her with her spirits lifted just a bit, because knowing that there was an end in sight was infinitely better than how she was living before, without any hope at all. It's a bittersweet story that's both realistic and thought-provoking, without being too grim. And this show is full of them.
それまでは雨を共に雲のように流れてゆこう
Okay, so what did we learn? Well, I've said it a million times now, but there's a lot of different types of episodic anime out there. They're way too varied to generalize like I was doing initially, and just like, well, every single topic I've ever talked about on this channel, liking and disliking certain kinds of episodic anime is a matter of personal preference. So in the end, no, I'm still not a fan of these types of episodic anime, which is fine, everyone gets to have their own tastes. But also because of this whole fucking crusade I went on, I've been able to discover a lot more types that I have been able to enjoy a lot more. So yeah, I was wrong. I think it's undeniable that the episodic format overall has a ton of potential for great storytelling. And we see that through the giant variety of anime that I talked about today, and definitely like a million more that I didn't even get to cover in this video. Also, no hate to Spy X Family, I still love that shit. Hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll try my best to have the next video not come out in like 20 years. Okay, stop recording. Bam!